All right, everybody, welcome to the Soil4Climate Special Earth Day event with Dr. Martin Frick, the Deputy to the Special Envoy for the UN Food Systems Summit of 2021. We are delighted to have him here, and he's going to give his vision for the UN Food Systems Summit and to tell you how you can be involved at the local level and also with your country representatives, because the UN, of course, is made up of the member states of the countries, and for whatever country you're in, you can be in dialogue with your representatives, and then we'll just take some questions. And we ask that you please keep your questions very brief and just ask one, not like the compound question thing, okay? Because we really need to move along. Karl, would you like to make some additional introductory comments, and then we'll get started?
Sure. As Seth said, it's a delight to have Dr. Frick joining us here this morning and to provide this opportunity for our members. We now have over 22,000 members in our Facebook group throughout the world. We see we're in the middle of a massive change in how food is being grown with the advances in soil biology and range ecology. We're understanding to a much greater extent the role that soil and agriculture has to play, not only as being subject to the changes that we're seeing in the weather as a result of climate change, but also in the role that agriculture can play in helping to mitigate climate change, not only in terms of carbon sequestration, as is what we often hear about now, or more and more hear about, I should say, but also in terms of increasing resilience to drought and flooding and other extreme weather events. So we're honored to have Dr. Frick here with us today to share his perspective and to find out how the global community can respond and support this vision toward more nature positive food production, working in a way that helps to heal land, restore soil fertility, improve wildlife habitat, while at the same time providing nutrition for the global population. So thank you, Dr. Frick, and we look forward to hearing from you today.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's a great honor to be here. And let me start with a confession. I'm a member of your Facebook group as well. Since the beginning, I would say, Seth, I should be one of the original members of this Facebook group. And Seth and I go back to meeting at FAO, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, where I served as the climate change director some years back, and even further back, and with an initiative that Seth is also related to. I helped building up an NGO on land restoration in 2011, together with Luke Nakacha, who is the former executive secretary of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, which somehow in the UN system is the landing place for what you are pretty much doing. Now, Seth has given me 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and we'll keep looking at both of you, Karl and Seth, and you just make signs when I'm up in time. So firstly, how did this summit came upon? It's basically that the three Rome-based agencies, that's the three UN organizations dealing with food, UNFAO, IFAD, that's the International Fund for Agricultural Development, basically a bank for smallholder farmers, and the World Food Programme, which you know because they just won the Nobel Peace Prize, joined up and said to the Secretary General, we need to talk about food. And we don't need to talk about food only from a perspective of hunger, and that would be big enough an issue, because for the first time in many years, hunger numbers are going up. FAO has given us data now that 3 billion, that's billion, not million, 3 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet. We have children, for example, in parts of Africa who are stunted and wasted because they don't have access to animal protein. They can't get milk, they can't get meat. So we have also on the other side of the planet, of course, an obesity pandemic of people who are malnourished, undernourished, who are lacking micronutrients. But a part of that, basically what people said was food systems are the decisive bit in fighting poverty, in fighting hunger, but also to work on other SDGs like climate or life on Earth, SDG 15. So we need to look at food as a system, and it's not a fringe issue. It's not that it only is about farmers and ministers and ministries about agriculture. We need to look at food from a very, very broad perspective. And the current pandemic is one of these perspectives, because people who are malnourished are vulnerable to illnesses. They cannot perform as they would like to. They cannot live their opportunities in life as other people could do. So the idea of a food system summit was basically born and announced in fall 2019. The Secretary General nominated Dr. Kalibata, the former Minister of Agriculture from Rwanda, to be the special envoy. And I learned about that in January and was excited about the opportunity when I was being asked to become the deputy of Dr. Kalibata. And this is what I have been doing ever since. So a food system summit. And the system bit is the most important, I would say, and also the most complicated, because everything depends on everything. You know, you cannot fight for lifting people out of poverty if you're destroying smallholder farms. You need to empower them. How do you empower smallholders? Well, in many parts of the world, tenure issues are unresolved. Women don't have the access they need to have to land. There is land grab of big companies. There are all sorts of situations compromising smallholder farmers. Or very simply, and all too often, there is an incredible pressure on prices. You simply cannot survive, or at least you simply cannot survive with decent production methods when the price is not right. Now I'm talking to you, I should be in Rome, but because of the pandemic, I'm only traveling on Sunday, talking to you out of Germany. My own country is one of the countries on this planet where households spend the least amount of money for food. And, you know, to me, that doesn't make sense. A typical German household spends less than 3% of the family income for food. So you have these absurdities that in front of a supermarket chain that is known for super cheap prices, industrial meat, and all of the ugliness that you can imagine, you basically have $80,000 BMWs and Mercedes in front of the supermarket. So obviously there's also something wrong with how people think about food, how they honor their food, how they relate to food. And that has to do with identity and culture. And I don't need to explain to that group what that means. Now, all of this to say why food is a system and why we lost, as an industrialized civilization, the touch with where we are coming from, how we relate to our food, how food brings you back childhood memories, how it relates you to the land, how the regions of this planet have their own identity and food language, I would say. You're losing a lot of that. We have lost a lot of that. Now, the Secretary General basically gave two instructions how to do the summit. It's a people summit and it's an action summit. And this is more than buzzwords. And let me explain why. A typical UN summit is negotiated with the ambassadors, and if it goes to a higher level, between the ministers, and in the end, it goes up to heads of state. This summit is very different because there are no negotiations. We are not digging into, like in the climate process, 25 years of difficult negotiations to come out with a compromise paper of sorts. That's not what we intend to do. We have, and let me now speak a little bit about the summit structure. We have a global thinking machine, and this thinking machine is consistent of 5 action tracks. These 5 action tracks should help us identify what food systems can and should do in order to become a positive engine for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, and not, as it is all too often the case, stand in the way of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. We spent a long time thinking about how to slice and dice it, and there is an inherent tension between making things workable and covering the whole systemic bandwidth of it. So first we came up with 5 action tracks. Number 1, on access to safe and nutritious food for everyone. Number 2, on shift to healthy and sustainable diets. There's a lot of misunderstanding about that one, but I'm coming to it. Number 3, on nature positive production. And I will talk about that more. Number 4, on livelihoods, because with more than 1 billion jobs in agriculture, if you want to create jobs, talk about agriculture. And number 5, on resilience. Resilience against shocks such as the pandemic, climate change, of course, but also conflict, tension, even war. We know that the world's poorest are under multiple stresses at the same time, which is just pushing them over the edge. Now, these action tracks, all 5 of them, are not led, as they were typically, as it would be typically the case, by 2 ambassadors. They are led by thought leaders in their different areas. Action track 1, led by Lawrence Haddad of GAIN. Action track 2, led by Gunhild Stordalen of the EAT Forum. Action track 3 is led by Joao Campari of WWF. 4 is being led by Michelle Nunn of CARE United States. And action track 5 has a co-lead, which is Sandrine Dixon from the Club of Rome. Many of you remember the Club of Rome from The Limits of Growth, one of the milestone papers from the 70s. Of course, Sandrine is not from that generation. She is much younger, but she stands in that generation. And Professor Salim Hook, who is one of the most renowned experts on climate change adaptation on this planet. They have been building a big group of people in the action tracks. We have more than 400 people. Some of them are known names to you. Hunter Collins is there. Professor Ratan Lal is there. People from ICRAF are there, because we were trying to get as good and as comprehensive a picture as possible. And this is the element of the People Summit, because we are not pushing for a political agenda. And believe me, we are not pushing for an industry agenda. I haven't been for sale in the last 25 years of my career, and I don't intend to go on sale in the next 25 years of my career. So what we have done with these 5 action tracks is basically opening up and say, give us your ideas, give us your suggestion, and we work with that. We have gotten what we ask for. As a friend of mine put it, we are drinking from siphons, from hydrants. We have in the first wave, which we closed by mid-February, 1,250 game-changing propositions. We are currently open for a second wave of propositions, and already the second wave has more than 800 submissions, so way south of 2,000 individual submissions. We have been looking at these submissions with a lens of not eliminating anything, because where there are people where there is action, we don't want to stop it. We don't want to go out and tell people, sorry, your project is not valuable. But we've been looking at it with a lens of clustering it and strengthening it, and basically integrate what we have. The result of that, we have 14 action areas, which are hosted in the 5 action tracks. And these are around thematic clusters, if I can say so. These action areas are not owned by the action tracks. They integrate people from different action tracks. So one of the game-changing areas is holistic grazing, cattle, right? We have that, of course, in Action Area 3, and I will speak more about that. But we also have people from 4 in it, because it's vital for livelihoods. We have people from 5 in that, because it's vital to build resilience. And of course, 1 is there on having access to safe and nutritious food, and capacity permitting, also someone from 2, because it's part of a sustainable diet if you get it right. Now, let me speak a little bit more about Action Track 3, which is the environmental positive one. We got a beating from some of our member states while we speak about nature positive, because in international relations, it's always about agreed language. If you move on from agreed language, you're entering a difficult territory. So nature positive production is not something that you find in a UN document before, but we've been defending it for a simple idea. Sustainability is a concept that was basically made popular by the Brundtland Commission in 1986. And the world was different in 1986. There was the idea of preserve what we have, keep the status quo. I think it's quite obvious that we cannot keep the status quo. We are way past the limits of this planet, and we have to move back within the planetary boundary. And the big idea here is that agriculture, which is currently depleting our natural systems, can turn around and become a positive force of restoration and regeneration and producing what basically agriculture was depleting. Now, I know Soil4Climate is very much advocating for soil organic carbon, for methods that are improving soil organic carbon. And as we are looking into indicators of what a nature positive production actually means, one thing obviously in terrestrial ecosystem stands out, and that is soil carbon. This is the one indicator that tells you whether you're doing something right or not. And at a time when geoengineering is more and more discussed, there's only one proven method to get CO2 out of the atmosphere and turn it into solid carbon on the ground, and this is photosynthesis. And so there is an obvious system that we need to work with. Let me close on the action track by giving you the 3 headlines from Action Track 3, which is basically protect natural ecosystems. We have very little left by now. If you've seen recently the documentary that David Attenborough did about his own life, it's, brings you to tears to see how the world has changed only in the lifespan of one man. The second cluster is about management. So how do you manage land that you're using for agricultural production so that you don't lose it? And that means that you're not losing soil carbon and that you're not losing more biodiversity. And the third cluster is all around restoration. Where are the potentials to restore land? How can we do that at scale, given that the size of Latin America is currently what we have as degraded land? So let me speak to the second point. How can you get involved? I was speaking about the action tracks, our brain, so to say. At the same time, we have been doing another quite unusual thing. We have been inviting every single country of the UN membership, it's 196, to convene their own food system summit dialogues. The first country that started to do that is actually the United States. And that even started under the old administration, unaffected by the change in the administration, which is quite amazing. We have now 103, and I might be wrong because it's almost every day that a new country comes in, that are hosting national level food system summit dialogues. And we have the big ones in that. The United States is there, China is there, India is there, Russia is there. I mentioned India and many, many others, 103, as I said, so far. And there we are basically encouraging the governments. And that is what the UN does. We are not the world government. We can encourage governments, but it's happening within their sovereignty and it's their decision. of democratically elected governments. But we encourage these governments to host the dialogues in a way that is inclusive, integrates not only different ministries, but really all of societies. First and foremost, the people who are actually producing food, but also, health experts who can tell you about the impact of it, environmental experts. So we are really getting an all of society conversation. Now, we are not naive, and we know that not every government is doing the perfect job in integrating all of those they should be integrated. So we built in a security mechanism, and you're looking at it, because independent dialogues have the same weight. They are as part of the Food System Summit as the national level dialogues, and it gives people a possibility to rally around the issues that are important for them. And it gives, most importantly, us a possibility to listen really from everyone. Because at the end, when we are coming to September in New York, the Secretary General will basically summarize what we have heard in this process. And that's quite revolutionary, because again, it's not a negotiation between government. It's basically going out to the people and say, what do you feel is important about food systems? What's wrong? What works? What doesn't work? What needs encouraging? What are the elements missing? And this is how you can get engaged, by participating in those dialogues, by being an organizer yourself in your city, in your region, in your part of the world, whatever your context, your frame is, you can organize these. And I will put in the chat box when I'm done talking some of the web references. There is the summitdialogues.org website, which gives you all the material about how to organize such a conversation, and most importantly, how you feed back, because that's part of the deal, that we hear from you. There is the foodsystems.community, which is a space that is accessible for everyone. Everybody can register there. And I really hope to have you guys there and contributing to the discussion, because this is a website which deliberately is not hosted by the UN. It's a bit outside, so it can become a community-owned space in which ideally conversations are not top-down or bottom-up, but peer-to-peer, horizontally. People saying, I have this issue, has anyone fixed it? Somebody else can give you the answer to that. And then, of course, we are on Twitter at Food Systems. My boss is at Agnes Kalibata, and I myself am at CM Frick, and I'm always happy to take the conversation forward. Last bit, because there's so much rumbling about this summit, and of course, you cannot enter food systems without ruffling feathers. That's just what's happening. It's like this song, we never promised you a roses garden. It's certainly not an easy conversation. And boy knows it's an emotional, it's a loaded discussion. It's so easy to step on a landmine. But the promise is this, that we use the convening power of the UN to really provide a platform where people can exchange their opinions. And we know that they disagree, and often they are loudly disagreeing. But what I'm hoping to find is the agreement under the disagreement, because often people shout at each other in an area where they completely ignore that a layer deeper, they would actually agree on the results needed, on maybe even the steps needed, not on the details. But I hope we can distill out for the Secretary General enough common ground that we can really make a dent and transform agriculture into something that helps us staying within planetary boundaries, and equally important, be a bit more fair in how we distribute, how we show solidarity with those who have nothing to eat and are suffering under so many different stresses. It's an SDG summit, and the Sustainable Development Goals have this wonderful tagline, leave no one behind. So we're starting with those furthest behind, speak to indigenous, smallholder farmers, landless people, all of those who find it difficult to have their voice heard. So with that, thank you for organizing this independent dialogue. I can stay with you until the top of the hour. And I'm very happy to take your questions. If time is running out, I'm also available digitally and happy to continue on Twitter or Facebook or wherever we are. I'm trying to answer as good as I can. Days are a bit packed, but bear with me, I will answer occasionally. Thank you very much, and back to Karl and Seth.
Thank you, Dr. Frick. I appreciate your encouraging our members, our viewers to participate in this process through the links that you will be sharing, to reach out to their representatives in their own country who will be participating in this summit so that the views can be expressed. There is a certain tension among the notion of only the larger agribusiness companies can feed the world, although we know the reality is that the majority of the world's food today produced by the smallholders, and the roles of individual farmers who may have 5 acres, 5 hectares that they're working with has a crucial role to play, not only in food production, but also as we discussed, in helping to mitigate climate change. And this is not just an issue for the large petroleum companies, although they have a vital role to play, but even some of the poorest people around the world, the herders and the smallholders, also have a vital role to play, and their role needs to be recognized and celebrated as we move forward. At this point, I would like to open it up to questions from the audience. There is a raise hand feature. If you go to reactions in the lower right corner of your screen, you can select to raise hand. And if people have questions for Dr. Frick, please indicate that and we'll provide an opportunity for you to speak directly with him. And I will see, there have been a couple of comments. Monica, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Tata or Tata, I'm not sure, says that the jobs available would immediately increase if governance was to embrace the proposal from the Mist Eckhart Winson in 1996, tax resources, not human labor. I would add tax AI, not human labor. Tax the use and abuse of agglomerating data. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on this, Dr. Frick.
It's interesting, and I'm trying to answer, but I go a step back. I think since the Industrial Revolution, the paradigm has always been that say that any methodology that comes with as little labor as possible is good. And I think that's in many instances in agriculture fundamentally wrong, because it is when we are mimicking natural ecosystems. We can build farms, and I always tell people those farms look like the picture books you're showing your kids, you know, where you have mixed systems, where there is a pond, where there are trees, where there are animals, where all of this is. The downside of these farms is they're super labor intensive. But really, is that a downside when we have millions of people who are looking for a job? Or is there a potential to really get people into employment? Now, I'm not a tax expert, but there is a lot of experimental talk about taxation. And indeed, if you mechanize more and more of society and more jobs are being done digitally, then the question is really fair, whether it's still contemporary to tax labor. I mean, think of all the truck drivers that might be obsolete in about 10 or 20 years because they will be replaced by self-driving vehicles. Is that progress when, you know, the company doesn't have to pay, or the workers in the company don't have to pay taxes anymore, and you are basically having machines? So I personally, but I can only speak here on this point because, you know, it's not a tax summit and I'm not a tax expert, but I personally think, yes, you know, that makes a lot of sense to look into where is the value creation and adjust taxes in a way that it goes into the created additional value and not so much into the labor that is being in it. But also, I think for smallholder farmers and really to better incomes in agriculture, what we need to do is we need to change how we look at farmers. If we only basically leave the farmers and the herders alone and say, well, you know, you need to make a life by selling your produce and the prices are ridiculously low, that is not going to happen. But if we understand that smallholders and farmers and herders are stewards of our ecosystem, that they are keeping our life support system running, then we should pay them for it. If your plumbing in the house is not working, you're calling a plumber to fix it. And that has a tendency to end up in a hefty invoice. I know what I'm talking about. I had a situation a week ago here. It should be the same thing with farmers and smallholders. If they sequester carbon, if they bring back biodiversity, if they help managing water systems, which good agriculture and good ranging does, then there should be a price for that. But it also, and that's the systemic aspect of it, goes to our fundamental attitude towards food and what we are doing with it. What's more important, talking about meat, that you have a Sunday roast that was expensive, but you can eat it with a good conscience because everything from workers' right to animal welfare is respected in the production, or to have 3 cheapo cheeseburgers a day, which ultimately make you ill and everybody along the chain as well. So we need to have these conversations around quality, about identity, and also about the production methods.
Thank you, Dr. Frick. I'm glad you raised the issue of meat. Soil4Climate, as an environmental climate activist organization, takes a somewhat unique perspective on this topic. We recognize that there is a growing body of research showing that meat production, when it is done in a regenerative fashion, offers tremendous environmental and climate benefits. And we feel this message is too often lost in the mainstream narrative, which issues the simplistic statement just to eat less meat. There was a 1995 report by Pimentel explaining that approximately a billion acres had been lost through soil degradation and erosion in the previous 50 years as a result of industrial agricultural practices, plowing, the use of synthetic fertilizer, pesticides, and so forth. And today, we understand that regenerative grazing can rapidly restore soil health. And in the case of a study that was done in 2018 by Paige Stanley and Jason Roundtree, it showed that when grazing is done properly, it sequesters more than enough carbon to offset all of the greenhouse gases associated with the finishing of beef production. So it's from our perspective, we see the need for grazing to restore not only the current lands that are being used and grazed in a way that's not beneficial, but in addition to restoring literally billions of acres of degraded land around the world. So I would like to hear your thoughts on the role that holistic planned grazing or adaptive multi-paddock grazing has to play in our food system going forward.
Well, I'm biased because I have been building up this NGO in 2011 at a place called Co in Switzerland. Wonderful, wonderful place where great people come together. We've been advocating for that, but I think, holistic grazing does work, and there are parts of land that you can only restore with animal. Think about the African grasslands, where for me, there is a perfect synergy because, as I said at the outset, this is also where there are dire nutritional needs. People need animal protein here, and at the same time it works. But as you say, the answer is not eat no meat, but the answer is either eat a lot of meat, but have a conscious relationship to it. 100 years ago, people wouldn't eat meat on a daily basis. And if you're honest about it, a piece of grass-fed beef comes with a substantial price tag. It's not a snack, it's not a burger. It is something that you have your Sunday steak, And that relationship should be, Karl, I don't know whether you're muted. I don't know whether you want to talk to me. That relationship is something we need to have, And that also, is what I mean with having a nuanced debate. If you have meat eaters and vegans shouting at each other, that doesn't work. You know, if you are in an urban setting, does it make more sense to really reduce your meat consumption, not to get cheap industrial meat, which is full of growth hormones, and you know, people are working under horrible conditions, and you give that up in favor of having less meat, but better meat, and being prepared to pay for that? And then also, can we get money? Can we get awareness for the need of landscape management? You know, I have a wonderful example of what I mean with that. In neighboring Austria, the railway system had, because it's a mountainous country, obviously, had a lot of problems with landslides and all sorts of difficulties. That were trying to fix these problems with more engineering, which came at a very hefty price tag. At one point, they basically realized that it was the farmers giving up their business that basically left the land unmanaged. So they started paying herders a bit of a premium to have their sheep and their cattle out there to manage the landscape for the benefit of those farmers who could go back into business, and also a much cheaper solution for the railway company that makes everybody happy. And, you know, you have certainly an image in your mind when you think about Austria, about this beautiful mountainous country. It's a man-made paradise. You know, the production method is part of the beauty of this landscape. If you go to Tuscany, imagine Tuscany without vineyards. It wouldn't be the same part of the world. So we need to see, and we need to honor these interrelatedness, and not just look at money and profitability, and that's the only currency we are having to judge what we are doing on this planet.
Thank you, Dr. Frick. I think you make many important points there. I would say that in the United States, as in Australia and other countries around the world that are experiencing these tremendous fires now, we see that grazing is being used more and more to help to remove the buildup of firewood, fuel material. And not only that, but when the grazing is done properly, it also restores moisture to a landscape. So it can play a tremendous role in dealing with the fire stress and fire potential. So it's not just meat production, but there's a whole panoply of benefits that can be provided as well. I would like to move on to see, and if anybody has questions, please feel free to raise your hand so that you can be recognized and we can get you in a direct dialogue. Oh, I see that Erin has a question. I'm going to allow her to unmute. Just please bear with me just one moment. And all right, Erin, if you would unmute, and I think you are, and then ask your question, please.
Hi, Martin. I have a question about the interconnection, the nexus between food production, water, energy. In a way, you can't isolate one from the other because each of them is so dramatically influential on the other. It doesn't matter which way you look at it. So I'm wondering, is this something that you are taking into account when you are hosting the summit?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mentioned the action tracks. Food, water, energy actually sits in action track number 5. We have Ratan, our friend Ratan Lal, arguing and saying, actually it's food, water, energy, soils as a cycle. When there's a lot to be said about this, but this interdependence is clearly understood. And, you know, if you're a climate change expert and you look into energy, the current production model is very, very energy intensive in agriculture. So if you're wasting 30% of the food that is being produced, you're obviously also wasting 30% of the energy that went into the production. So this is also to the heart of what I was trying to explain with the action tracks. We want to make it manageable. A project has to sit somewhere. There are a couple of countries, for example, very committed about school feeding. School feeding is super important. But then again, you know, you need to connect that with everything else. The school feeding can't be any sort of bad food and chips and what have you, but it should be healthy and nutritious food. It should be ideally locally produced. There should be a connection to the farmers from where the food is being produced. There should be a pedagogic aspect that children learn about where their food is coming from. So my point is that no matter where you start, everything relates to everything. And then it's mind-boggling because you cannot do everything because everything is so complex and complicated. But I think, and this is also the point for the independent dialogues, the complexity becomes manageable when you're in a landscape. When you're in one valley, then it becomes more understandable where your water is coming from. That, for example, climate change means that there is no ice and snow on the mountains, which doesn't give you a water reservoir for summer. Then there need to be something made about it. But also to Karl's point earlier, it is, and that's crazy, but it is the reality. It is the multiple benefits of something that sometimes makes it difficult to get it landed in governance and in governments and in international affairs. Because, you know, if you have a development bank, often the development bank is saying, give me a project that does gender empowerment. Well, if I'm supporting women smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa, I'm doing that. But I also increase food security, nutrition security, rural empowerment, water management, soil carbon, all of that. So you present all of these co-benefits with a big smile, and as a consequence, you're not being funded because the funder was looking into a project that only does that. And because other things would be in the portfolio of somebody else. So this is where we need people to think in a broader unit. Let me give you another example. Today, Special Envoy John Kerry is meeting his Chinese counterpart on climate, which is fantastic. It's really the kind of progress we are needing. And they will also speak, if you check the communique they did a day or 2 days ago, they will also speak about agriculture. It says reducing emissions from agriculture, which is not a bad thing to say, but it also gives you a feeling like more lobbying is needed so that it's being understood that agriculture can do even more than just reducing the emissions. It can actually turn it around. It can absorb emissions. It can be net carbon negative if you do it right. And to make that understood needs conversation of people who would normally not speak to each other. Because one person is a climate expert, an energy expert, somebody with a background in farming. But I think the added value of this UN summit is to bring these people together and say, you should be having a discussion because, you know, there are linkages that are simply missing. And I think that's the core message of why doing that and what the UN actually can do. Because on the many things the UN can't do, but convening is one of the things that the UN can do.
Thank you, Dr. Frick. Our next question, and then I'll get to some of the questions in the chat box. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Ramus or Ramus Kent, and if you would kindly unmute yourself and ask your question.
Greetings, everyone. Greetings to you, Dr. Frick. This may be a little bit of a curveball, but I mean, it seems like a lot of what you're referring to is sort of boils down to something of a rethinking of sort of the way that we're modeling the world, because a great deal of this has to do with some fundamental understandings or, you know, misunderstandings about where we've been placed. So the fact that you mentioned there's a tendency to oversimplify and silo a lot of these issues, and there's a failure to actually appreciate the complexities that are part and parcel of everything that you just mentioned. How can that be addressed through suggestions that, say, someone like yourself would make, as far as certain policy changes that would actually allow for a lot of what's being suggested here to be binding, that would actually tie different institutions, businesses, corporations, what have you. It would actually, really hold their feet to the fire to implement these things in a meaningful way.
That's a good and complex question. And I'm answering a bit on a tangent, but I'm coming to your point. I told you about the 103 countries that are convening Food System Summit dialogues. They are coming online now. The letter was sent to all of the governments in November. So why does that take such a long time? Because in many countries, there were political, differences and tensions and action basically to sort out who is the national convener. And I think this is fantastic news, because if nobody were interested, it would fall down the chain in some ministries, and some not so important person would do that. Here, what I've seen in many countries is that people were actually arguing. Should it be me, the Minister of Environment? Should it be me, the Minister of Agriculture? And that's interesting. It becomes a political issue. It's something that an aspiring politician wants to lean into. That's a major change, because, agriculture was something that was sort of running in the background, not really interesting for anyone. Food is something you get in the supermarket. It's cheap, it's available, so where's the problem? And a farmer has become almost a synonym for someone who is backward and not educated, and so there's a fundamental thing to be done. But I think one of the antennae for what's happening are smart young urban people, best educated, best conditions, nicely connected to the world. So what are these urban hipsters doing? They're starting building community gardens, which is really interesting. There's obviously something they did understand. Some years back, I went to Detroit, and going to some of the most rundown neighborhoods. And you could see, Detroit has always this underlying heartbeat of the music. It's just a music city, amazing musicians coming out of Detroit. But then you go through the city and suddenly there's a diner, and that looks nice. It's just done with love. You go in and you see on the menu, they have local products. They tell you where the milk is coming from. They tell you where the meat is coming from, where the veggies are coming from. Then you trace that back. And then there are a couple of young people starting urban gardening. Then there's going into simple food processing. And this is not because these kids wouldn't have anywhere else to go. They could be high-paid consultants or whatsoever. But there's a sense of, there's a need to reconnect. I want to understand where my place is in the world. I want to understand where my food comes from. I want to have a relationship to that. And last sentence, interesting. COVID has pushed people really to think much more about food. I think never in the last 50 years was so much bread baked at home. People are going back and doing simple food stuff that our grandparents were able to do, and it's a hip thing now to learn how to do a sourdough. And that's interesting because it gives you this feeling of when you have an identity crisis, and I think we are collectively having an identity crisis. What are the elements that helps you grounding yourself? Where do you understand what matters? And I hear that from more and more young people. I was speaking yesterday at in Boulder at the university. Was it Boulder? It was Colorado. I'm not sure whether it was Boulder. And the kids are coming exactly with that. And these are privileged kids. They go to university, they receive an expensive education, they have the world open, and they're interested in food. That's interesting. And that's something that makes me quite hopeful, I have to say.
I wanted to mention from the comments, Lise Kohler-Rolfson mentioned that she was glad to hear that herders are mentioned because they figured out how to produce food without fossil fuels, biodiversity loss, and chemicals. And I want to reinforce that point. Many of us are big fans of regenerative farmer Gabe Brown in North Dakota. He has used no synthetic fertilizer on his 5,000 acre farm since 2007. And we understand that reducing the use of synthetic fertilizer is crucial, not only because of the significant amount of methane that's used in its production, but also the release of nitrous oxide when it is applied to the crop fields. So by reintegrating animals back to into a farm system to provide the fertility, there are many biodiversity and climate-related benefits. And our next question will come from Anurag Srivastava. And again, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. If you would unmute and ask your question, welcome. Anurag, if you would unmute.
Yeah.
There you are.
Yeah. Yes. Am I audible?
Yes, please continue.
Right. I have this. I've done some work in the Central Himalayas with the land use organization on spring revival. The Himalayan springs are fast drying up. I'm sorry, I have a mask. I just came from. I have a little cough, so I'm at home. Am I here? Yes. So I'm using a mask, and very recently this project was concluded, which was looking at land use for which springs would retain water or there would be a runoff. So it's a very typical land use studies, and then we have come across results that a particular kind of monoculture, pine monoculture, has threatened the place, the traditional plants, the traditional vegetation, which is oak and rhododendrons. They grow over 25 or 30 years, but pine is an invasive species. And it's a big reason for forest fires, which are a big concern in the state of Uttarakhand and Himalayas. The Central Himalayas run through typically seven or eight states. And water security is a big problem. So agriculture is a big problem. And there are many challenges too. So there are local solutions. Some of the conclusions that came from the scientific land use studies, exactly what people, some of the more knowledgeable people have been living there, like forest officer or agriculturalists. They know more than scientists. So for something like this, that now we know that a particular, and now we are trying to work on, I wonder the solutions lie in what is called the ecological restoration or landscape design. But I wonder, like, if there are excellent organizations in India. There is. I can always talk to Terry, the Tata Energy Resource Institute, which had played a key role in the IPCC report. R.K. Pachauri was the head of the IPCC, was also the Director General. And there are good organizations. There are good science organizations, which are central government organizations located in the hills. There is a Himalayan research organization like ICIMOD. But I wonder, what is the kind of political will when you're talking about ecological restoration? I want to know if there are some kind of resources which the United Nations, intellectual resources by way of knowledge sharing, which can be provided, and we can do some kind of bottom-up lobbying. We don't know what the governments want at the center. It becomes a political thing. But then, what would you say about beginning from, say, 5 villages, coming up with a plan, and more sharing of intellectual resources? Not even if there are some philanthropists who would like to put their money there. They want something concrete, something more credible, with names like United Nations, FAO. They feel that you've done a better job. So if there are any thoughts on that, I think people know best. This whole thing about soil, energy, water nexus is something very holistic. It's living. It lies in living a particular kind of way of life, which is deteriorating together with the water resources. So I'm wondering, very open-ended kind of a question on if you have any kind of any advice on any generic steps, something in general, or if there's anything specific or resources about, say, slope agriculture, or lessons from Austria, as Mr. Martin is familiar with Austria and Switzerland.
We need to finish up soon, but thank you for your question.
Okay, well, maybe in rapid fire, there is a scientific group that is publishing their findings, but I hear what you are saying is much more sort of the hands-on management. I mean, in the grazing and soil issue, the Facebook group is, of course, a great resource. And I was also mentioning the food systems community. And I very much hope that we can build that up to be this sort of practitioner resource. I have plans with it. I think if it's becoming accepted, if there are enough people, there's also exciting things to do, like direct translation with artificial intelligence. So you would have a farmer who can put in a question in Hindi and somebody might answer in Portuguese, but you can connect that directly. For now, this is pretty much in the early days, the food systems community, and it will only be as good as the people who are there. So we need many people to register. We need to establish these cross linkages. And from the scientific group, it's 27 people, but they are connected to large networks. CGIAR is there. There's IPCC here, which is alone 3,500 scientists. So there is a big network which is needed. But I have high hopes in that specific area of knowledge sharing to the digitalization, that it helps farmers to really get the information you need where you need it. Getting granular weather forecasts to people, for example, or snapping a picture of a plant with an illness, and an algorithm can explain you what that is and how you can fight it without the use of pesticides, because there's all sorts of alternatives model for that. I think that would be really something that needs to happen. And on this website, I hope that we can pool knowledge. And that's also a question to the geeks out there, how you make this information accessible, because often people don't know that their answer is out there because they don't know how to ask the question and they don't know where to look for this information. So there is a big issue of information availability, not of the existing of it, but make it accessible to people.
Dr. Frick, thank you so much. I know we're at the hour now, and you said you had to leave. I just wanted to say, in terms of making the information accessible, can you please give us the link, or make sure I have the link to share, so that people can know who their national representative is. So the fellow that we just spoke to and other people, we have an international audience here. If they can just know who to contact in their country to have a voice in the UN summit. Summitdialogues.org. It says the national representative is there. Okay, great. Thank you so much. We do want to let you go. If you have any closing statement, please make so now. Otherwise, thank you so much. And I just want to tell the people, stay on the line. After Dr. Frick leaves, seeing as we're all here in the Zoom call anyway, we'll continue to chat amongst ourselves. Dr. Frick.
Excellent. Well, just to say thank you for organizing it, and hoping that we can continue that and that we see each other also on the different digital possibilities, although I'm still hoping we can meet in person very soon again. So all the best to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And everyone else, you can stay in the call and we'll continue.